I put this slide on up here, and I'm quoting from the Book of Mormon. Why this means so much to us. Jim and myself and his brother Ted is with us as well. Good to have you here. For me, Sudbury is where it really all happened. Not just being born in Sudbury back in 1946, but being baptized in the old YMCA building down on Elm Street, and then attended Sudbury High School, and everything else. So I am a Sudburian, but I love the scripture. You probably can identify with this, where you were baptized. Now it came to pass that all this was done in Mormon, yea, by the waters of Mormon, in the forest that was near the waters of Mormon. Yea, the place of Mormon, the waters of Mormon, the forest of Mormon. So we didn't have many forests back then. But how beautiful are they? Even with all the rocks. To the eyes of them who there came to know the knowledge of their Redeemer. Yea, how blessed are they, for they shall sing his praise forever. And that's what we're doing here today. For me, at least, this is the waters of Mormon. This is the place. This is why we're here. And so I'm not just speaking spiritually here, or physically, or historically. I'm speaking emotionally, because my parents joined the church here. And we'll talk about that as we move along. So, I'm not going to talk about all the history of the church in Canada. You all know that there's a great history of the church in Canada. Joseph Smith first preached the gospel here. This is the first country outside the United States that ever heard the gospel of Jesus Christ. It was in Toronto where John Taylor was baptized and became the third president of the church. Joseph Fielding also was baptized. And you know the history of Joseph Fielding, all the way down from Joseph Fielding to Joseph Fielding Smith was the current day. But we don't have time to go all the way back and look at the history of the church in the 19th century. We're going to have a tough time just talking about the last 20 years. So, all the sources that you're seeing here are taken from the church archives in Salt Lake City. I've been spending several weeks working on that. In the Canadian Mission records, the Sudbury Branch records, the church records, incredible. So, the Canadian Mission was organized just after the ending of the First World War in 1919, with Nephi Jensen being the mission president. And the Toronto branch was organized on May the 2nd, 1920. And you notice all these early communities as Hamilton, Bracebridge, Brantford, Guelph, Gulf, London, Uxbridge, etc. And in those days, they were having lots of street meetings and giving out pamphlets and tracting. But very early on in Canadian mission history, you see it starting in Toronto. The very first mention of Sudbury that I found was in 1926. Would Sudbury be worth working? April 20th, 1926, President Joseph Quinney, Jr. of the Mission and Conference, President Robert Stewart, left for Sudbury and North Bay and intermediate towns to see if they would be worth working. They returned the 23rd, obviously with the conclusion, maybe not quite yet. That's what I think is the first mention in the history of the church of Sudbury in 1926. Wow. Sudbury's population in the 1820s was only 8,000.
That's it.
Oh.
By the way, what made Sudbury?
CPR.
The mines.
Well, the CPR discovered the mines.
And the mines.
But it was going to be the war. It's going to
Oh, yeah.
make
Yeah,
it
the
boom.
war.
Yeah.
Before the war, Sudbury was a tiny little town.
After World War I.
But it's going to be the war beginning in 39. Well, my mom and dad moved here in 1939 from Belleville in Kingston. That's when they came up to work in the mine. So I got a connection there. Now, okay, early missionary forays into northern Ontario as early as 1927. They're taking a tour of the northern part of the district. We were part of what was called the Toronto District. It was a Canadian mission, and then there was the Toronto District, and then there was the Toronto Branch, which was downtown Toronto. But we were part of the Toronto District. We traveled as far as North Bay, holding meetings in the towns as we worked our way along, Barrie, Aurelia, Bracebridge, you can see them all, even up to Timmins. In 1927, they're looking at these places and visiting families that have been moving from Europe. And so, here we go. But there were certain particular barriers or impediments to the church growing in Sudbury, even getting established in Sudbury. And I'm just mentioning a few of them here. One is geography. And I'm sorry that you can't see this map very well. Let me just try to explain it. This is a map back in 1930-31. Okay, you all know, here's Toronto down here, Hamilton, Niagara Falls, what have you. My mom and dad over here in Belleville, Kingston, Ottawa's over here. North Bay was the center of the universe then, in the north. Because the highways went there. See how that goes? There's no Highway 69 going from Toronto to Sudbury. And so everybody's going to Bracebridge and Aurelia and Barrie and up to North Bay and all the way up to Timmins. Where's Sudbury on this map? You have to go to North Bay to get over there. And geographically, it's a challenge. Because otherwise, you have to take a ferry up through Manitoulin Island and over here to Sudbury.
Yeah.
Sudbury was off the beaten track, that's all I'm saying. In the 1920s, it was very difficult to get to Sudbury. Much easier to do North Bay and Timmins. And that's what you have. They're all going up through, it wasn't the nickel belt, it was the north. So that's one barrier. Another one is But Sudbury had a reputation of being, this is right from the records. September 21st, 1921, President Brown reported on a recent trip north of North Bay, it's too cold. Too cold to do much tracking up there. And so Sudbury was considered to be the icicle of the Canadian mission. We can do better. Southern Ontario. But there were also attacks upon the church. Now I know this because I remember this Reverend Boyd of the Berean Baptist Church down on Pine Street. We were being attacked by other faiths. The elders in Sudbury, now this is a little later on, so I'm just jumping ahead a little bit, but there was a lot of opposition towards Mormonism, both Mormonism and Sudbury.
Yeah.
And here we have the elders being attacked by a certain Reverend Boyd of the Berean Baptist Church. I can remember his talks as a kid listening to him, just slamming the church every which way he could. Extremely active in opposing the church. And Mrs. Nesbitt, who apparently began to study with the elders, allowed herself to be led astray and seriously aids Boyd in the city. So we got geography, we got climate, we've got other problems. What were some of the other ones? Population. We weren't a center of population. We're in northern Ontario, and there's not enough people here. We have very few missionaries. We got to send them where the people are. Toronto, Kitchener, Hamilton, Kingston, Montreal, Sudbury. And then you had a decade of the Great Depression. Of course, that was terrible everywhere. But it affected the number of missionaries. Number of missionaries declined dramatically during the Depression. And then comes the war. Now the war, of course, is going to be a great boon to Sudbury because we're mining the things that the tanks need, the military needs, nickel. And so Sudbury is going to boom, but we don't get the missionaries during the war because they're off fighting. So that's going to be an effort. I just talked about some of the prejudices, and we had no basis of support. There wasn't hardly anyone here. And so we had some early challenges in the Sudbury Branch. Okay, we talked about that, and we talked about that. Now, just before I turn it over to Brother Galovan, I just end it here, my part of this for a moment is, okay, with all of those problems, how do we ever get going? What was the spark? How does this thing really get going? And here's what we're laying the groundwork here. Sudbury's a booming town. It's now on the map. We got to build that highway. We got to. The CPR's got to shape up and get all these military minerals going. So Sudbury's starting to boom. After the war ended, there was this post-war sense of confidence that, hey, we won the war. We can beat the economy. We can really do something. It was a time of great confidence and hope. And the missionaries now begin to grow in numbers because the war is over and the depression's over. And now we can get the missionaries to where we need to get the water to the end of the road. And that's what we're trying to do here. Well, you can see all this sort of thing. Even during the Korean War, we're going to get some of the finest missionaries. I told Sister Albers that I would read this because she's from Bracebridge.
Yes, I am.
For some reason, Bracebridge is all over the place in the church records of the church. I mean, Bracebridge. Years ago, there was a small but thriving branch at Bracebridge. This is 1933, so even before that, there was a branch. But as time went on, dissension, backbiting, I'm just telling the record, and other cancerous troubles became prevalent among the members until the mission president, as a punishment for this lack of unity and harmony, took the elders out. And as a result, the branch with its auxiliary organizations collapsed. Then there was a period of years when the elders only visited there occasionally. However, as a result of the enthusiasm of the saints, and this may be part of your family, the second generation, during the past 2 years, the elders were again sent to Bracebridge. Since then, as a result of their efforts, the attendance at the meetings has grown until they now have to hire a hall. So, right from the get-go, Bracebridge is on the church map, which is quite significant. And then they start making tours in the summertime. With all these missionaries, most of them don't know what cold is. So they go up here. And here, an annual mission tour, President Wallace Banks in 1936. They left Toronto for an extended tour of the north. Notice where they're not going. Aurelia, Gravenhurst, Bracebridge, Kearney, Cobalt, Curtin Lake, you can name it. Not Sudbury.
Everywhere else.
Okay, and now we're going to get to Sudbury. And I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
I was one person by myself. I fell in out there. Yeah, it's harsh.
Well, it's good to be here. Dick and I had planned on making a leisurely trip here and just to see Sudbury and Copper Cliff and see some of my French Canadian relatives. And then we made the mistake of talking to the bishop, and we ended up. And then which caused, so Dick spent weeks in Salt Lake at the historical resources up there, and I've done some work on some material that I had, and we put this together. We hope it's a benefit to you. He made reference to a couple of important things. This is from the biography of Neil Maxwell, and you know Elder Maxwell, and you know that he was actually here in Sudbury. He was here. We have documented evidence of that. He wasn't here as a full-time, as a missionary here, that is, as stationed here. He was the district president in Toronto. But we have him attending meetings here in Sudbury. This is from his biography. The war had strained leadership resources and many smaller church units, which had unavoidably gone unattended by the church's depleted missionary force. World War II. For example, in the city of Aurelia, Ontario, Neil, Elder Maxwell's first field of labor, he found things were in some disarray among the branch membership. That was the case after the war. This is a photo of downtown Sudbury. But these missionaries were here because they wanted to be. Like Elder Maxwell served in Okinawa in the U.S. Army. and through a lot of serious combat. And he made commitments when he was a missionary that he would come, he would serve a mission if the Lord would allow him to survive, which he did. And so he came to his mission. The first 3 weeks in the mission field found us knocking on hundreds of doors without a single invitation to come in. That was the condition of even the branch in Aurelia.
Wow.
And it was more serious the further north you go, and to Sudbury, which they had forgotten about. The first record we found of Sudbury meeting and baptisms was this. On January 15th, 1948, baptismal service was held, and our laser pointer isn't working, so I'm going to point. This was the program. There were 6 people present, and 6 people bore their testimonies. And presiding was President Neil Maxwell, who was president of the Toronto district. Okay, so he was up here for this meeting. 2 people were baptized, and so that's the setting. There was another member, Sister Martin, and that might show up in a different slide. But not very many, and we're thinking maybe just a couple of missionaries. Now, I want to play a short tape for you. This is original research. My brother organized a meeting in 2007 in North Salt Lake of 4 missionaries who had served at this time in 1947-48 in Sudbury. This is they were all 80 years old, approximately. It now seems young to me. This was a wonderful meeting, and it was a gold mine of information. They talked about their experience here. And so I'm going to play the tape of Steve Call, who served here. He showed up, we can't quite pin it down, about April of 1948. And he knocked on the door. That was an important door to me. And to get this going, Dick, I should hit enter.
No. Wait.
This is about a 3-minute tape, but he describes,
He
he was
had
the,
actually 2 members. One was actually the foreman of the big nickel mine there, very inactive. And he wouldn't even let us in. When I felt impressed, every time I visited, he would talk at the door with me. The other member, his wife, was Harris, is that right?
Harris, that's right.
And they lived out in the country, and Joe can tell you stories about that. But it never got above 20 below zero for, I think, 26 days. And this happened to be on a Saturday, and we were out tracking at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we were blowing, snowing. It was cold, it was really cold. Knocked on the door, right there on the corner. Little white frame home. And the man opened the door, and we said, we told him who we were. He said, anybody who comes in the name of the Lord is welcome here. Come back tonight, and I'll visit with you. Shut the door.
Come back tonight.
That's the first time I ever met him. So we went back at 9 o'clock at night, and we never left there at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, my.
We just kept asking questions, kept talking. Your mother did not want to have anything to do with the missionaries, so she went out with her girlfriends. Did tell you that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what she was doing.
And the thing is, she came home, and she was stuck in the kitchen because she couldn't go to the living room or get to the bedroom and bathroom. And Ed just kept asking questions. We came back next Saturday and talked more with him. He says, now my wife has gone out with a girl. She's coming home. I'm going to ask questions, loud questions. Talk loud, I know what she's talking about. So she can hear what's going on in the kitchen. Steady, I think it was 1:30 in the morning. She still didn't come in. The next Saturday we came back. She came home much earlier. And finally she came in. And I remember when the first time she came in, I don't believe that. Tell me more about it. Why did you go? And that's how we became, the first time I met you, I was on the third visit. And then the fourth time, we had a great discussion. That's as far, I think, only met 4 times with your dad. But he was converted after the first meeting after 1 o'clock. He knew the church. Because he was teaching, and I think the United Brethren.
That's the account of the contact with my parents.
Wow.
And Steve Call had been the second companion of Neil Maxwell. And then he transferred to Sudbury during a blizzard, knocked on the door. And my dad answered and said, come back at 9:30 tonight. And he said, we didn't know whether or not to believe him. We're supposed to be in bed, by 10 o'clock. But they came back, they talked until 1:30 in the morning, and Steve was convinced, and my dad said he had a testimony by 1:30 in the morning.
Wow.
Now, my mother wasn't interested.
But we only had
Whoops,
actually
whoops, I
2
didn't stop
members.
this.
One was actually the foreman of the big temple mine there, and he was very inactive. And he wouldn't even let us in.
We gotta stop that.
I felt harassed every time I visited.
There we go. So what happened, my mother wasn't interested. And so she said, so when Dad was being taught by the missionaries, she went either with her friends bowling and having a beer, or went next door to her best friend, Evelyn. And then Dad came up with the strategy, as you heard in there, in our little house at 521 Pine Street. It's just, you can see it if you want to. The only way you could get to the bedroom was through the kitchen and the living room. Missionaries were in the living room. And so Dad would wait until he heard the kitchen door open, and then he would tell the missionaries, go. And my mother was taught the gospel hiding in the kitchen. But then she joined the church. These are the missionaries. Palmer Collier was here. We're not sure who his companion was. That's Steve Call, the 80-year-old man you were listening to a few moments ago, who came here in the spring of 1948. And later on, a young man by the name of Joseph Smith showed up, and he was also one of the missionaries that was influential with my parents. I refer to this, when we think about this, the period after the war, when Elder Maxwell ran into this in Aurelia, where there didn't seem to be any activity, and when Steve Call came to Sudbury, although somebody was baptized early in January, when he came, he said there were no active members, maybe 2 families, maybe a 3rd person, a Sister Martin. And so I'm thinking of this as, I use the word spark. This was said by Donald Ripplinger, who was the assistant Mormon Tabernacle Choir director in the 90s. But he was a missionary here. He was stationed here. And he said, well, what was happening in Sudbury was the talk of the mission. Things started to happen. They finally discovered Sudbury. And things started to happen in Sudbury. And so you can see the rest of that. And then Joseph Smith, who showed up a few months later, Steve said, but all we did was track. But some great things came from those contacts, including my parents and some others. And Elder Joseph Smith said, yes, he planted, we reaped. From, a familiar phrase from the New Testament. This is the first record that Dick found in Salt Lake of a Sunday worship service, presided over by then Elder Joseph Smith. Wasn't a branch yet, from what we could tell. The pianist was another member who had been here. And then you see the members were 6 at the time, 14 investigators, pretty good missionary work, and so on. And these are all in the records of the church. Now, my dad wanted to know more, and they had a missionary conference in Toronto in September. It was attended by Marion D. Hanks, who at the time was an assistant to the Quorum of the 12, and the mission president. Dad went to talk with President Iyer. He wanted to learn more. He had kind of tapped out the missionaries. And so he spoke with the mission president. Then he said, then President Iyer said, I've got to go, I've got a meeting of missionaries. And my dad says, oh, okay, I'd like to attend that. And now, I don't know exactly what happened in that conversation. I'm just assuming. I've got a feeling that President Iyer said, well, it's just for missionaries. And he said, what are you trying to hide? Well, what are you? And President Iyer, I can just see him kind of saying, okay, you can attend. Now, in this photo are approximately 40 missionaries and 4 older people, President Iyer and his wife, and Mayor and G. Romney. My dad's in there. Anybody have an idea who he is in this picture?
Probably the tall one.
You think he's the tall one?
Yeah.
Because I'm tall.
Yes.
Any other thoughts on who he? Well, let me point out my dad to you. This is my dad right here. He looks like one of these missionaries.
He does.
And we found out later that he had actually, during the testimony meeting, did born his testimony. And this was 3 months before he was baptized, while Mom was being taught in the kitchen. And he was waiting for her to join. Sister Penny, a well-known member of the church, for those who you might have known or been around for a long time, was baptized at this missionary conference. And she was a lifelong friend of us, of our family, and some names we mentioned here that some of you might recognize. This was the curling rink. As the church started to grow, we needed a place to meet other than in homes. And from what we can tell, this was the first place that the missionaries met. Wasn't an organized branch, but we had enough people attending. And then later on, the Moose Hall Lodge, that some of you were familiar with, we just looked at it yesterday. What's not a lodge anymore, it's something else. And then the first Sunday school was held from the records, 26th of September, 1948. So the branch was starting to, a few people were showing up, a few more members, starting to get organized. And this missionary who had transferred in a few months later, who was reaping what Elder Call had started, he was now the presiding elder with his missionary companion, Woodard Sandberg, who ended up baptizing my mother and dad. This is a photo, we think it's about November 1948, just after the baptism, and I'll point out a few people. This is Dick Bennett's brother, Gary. That's my mother. That's Dick's mother, who's not yet a member. That's his father. My dad is right in front of Cliff Bennett. And this is Eddie Palmer, who was the first local branch president, and he was baptized on the same day that my parents were. And then there are a few investigators, quite a few missionaries in this group here. But this you see, the key 1948 date when there were 7 baptisms on one day, and I don't know, double the branch in one day.
Jimmy, we will point out Sister Penny there.
What day? Oh, Sister Penny. Yeah, Sister Penny, who has been baptized, she's right here.
And Sister Martin beside her, to her right.
Okay,
So would
so
that
we're
be
right.
Emma Martin? Or in the
So you see,
No.
after the war, branches had depleted resources, very few missionaries. Then the missionaries started to come in, experienced, usually people who had been in the war, older, who were a little more, a better idea of the gospel and had some commitment to it because of the difficulties they had experienced. And then it was just starting to grow, and this is a classic snapshot of that group. Now, a building block baptism. Let's see, this was, this is the one we're talking about. And my dad was baptized, my mother, Marie Rose Eva Legault. She went by the name Gail all the rest of her life because she didn't want to tell my dad her name when he first met her. So he told her she was Gail. And she went by the rest of her life. And you can see, and then on this day, incidentally, that's me, James Walter. My brother and I, Pete and Carol, my younger sister, were all blessed. I was at the time, I would have been about 4.5 years old. Not a baby, but blessed. You do it when you can. And then the sacrament was passed for the first time. And so these were the building blocks that I guess you would say were fundamental. Baptisms occurred at the YMCA. We visited that building yesterday. It's a parking lot. So the photos didn't turn out that well. But, that was an important location. Now, and then the Moose Hall, which some of you are familiar with. My family had moved by then, and so I never did attend at the Moose Hall Lodge, as it's called. Change in venue, some changes took place. We went from the curling rink eventually to the Moose Hall. Cliff Bennett, who is Dick Bennett's father, was playing. We found one of the interesting things you find when he was doing the research, he did all the work. You find that the names start to show up. His parents joined the church in 1952, right? But his dad was playing the piano starting in 1948. So he had a lot of exposure to the church very early on. And the first meeting held in the Moose Lodge was in 1948. Joseph Smith was presiding, Elder Joseph Smith, that is, young missionary Joseph Smith. Another early baptism took place in 1951. And you see some of the names here and so on. There's a very kind of a cute story about Joseph Smith. Now, this is the missionary, 21-year-old missionary, and he was carrying, of course, his missionary certificate, and it had his name on it, Joseph Smith. And we want to play, I think that's next. And what's interesting when you go back through these things, you start reading about, that's my mother, giving the closing prayer, and we read about Cliff Bennett playing the piano at all these meetings, my dad giving talks, and they have the names of the talks that they were giving. Now, the audience was probably a fraction of the size of this group here, but you know, we all do our part. This is Joseph Smith, Elder Joseph Smith, and I want to play for you this his account of an experience he had meeting Oliver Cowdery. Okay? And if I get this.
Or whether it was when we took his place. Anyway, in Sudbury, there was one bus that circled the whole city periodically. And we had left that area and we were walking along, and the city bus went by us, and it stopped in the middle of the intersection. We were back there, but it just stopped and stayed. And my companion said, "Why did they do that?" And of course, we surmised later that they had somebody had told them about the missionaries and so on. Anyway, when we stopped and got up up there, the bus driver opened his window and looked down at us. He says, "Are you the Mormon missionaries?" We said, "Yes." He says, "That's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, isn't it?" We said, "Yes." And he said, "I'm a member of the reorganized church." I said, "Oh, that's interesting." And he said, "You know that man was with Joseph Smith when he translated the Book of Mormon? Who would that be?" Yes. He said, "That's my name." I said, "Oh," and reached my hand.
I'm Joseph Smith.
Let us come and see him. He wasn't interested in the church. You're going to con for 5 years. There's a humorous one.
That's great on one That's all you can do.
A Temple Square picture and my name. Now that they had a railroad. Was
How's that? Oops, I gotta get out this. How's that one-upsmanship? This man is a direct descendant, apparently, of Oliver Cowdery, and he runs into Joseph Smith. We got, at least, you could tell they were having a great time. The first priesthood meeting was held, from what we can tell, in 1950 in the Moose Hall. Closing prayer by my dad. Challenges, as every branch, you know, in the earlier days of the church, we were gathering in Zion. And then the brethren asked us to build the church where you are. My parents, after a couple of years, decided to move to Utah. So I grew up in Utah. And that was the kind of challenge. When you have 15, 20, 30 members and a family or two leaves, you feel it. And then we go through that, and that's the story of the growth of the church. One thing I should mention, you might wonder about the connection between Dick and I. We lived at 521 Pine Street. And when my mother was avoiding the missionaries, she went next door to her best friend, Evelyn. Her name was Evelyn Bennett. And she had two sons. Cliff Bennett was her husband. She had two sons, Gary and Richard. Gary, they joined the church a few years later. Dick will talk about that. Gary fulfilled a mission. He was the, as I recall, the Institute Director at Utah State for many years. Dick went on a mission to Texas and became state president in Winnipeg. He's a BYU professor, wrote a bunch of books about the church. And you're on the, I keep getting the name wrong, is it the Church Curriculum Committee?
Correlation.
The Church Correlation Committee. So anything that's written and published has to go through somebody like Dick. So presumably this presentation is reasonably accurate. But that's our connection. If you go down Pine Street to 517, no, what was your address? 517 Pine Street. And you'll see that it's right next door to 521 Pine Street. And that's where my mother went to hide out, and then she snuck in the kitchen, and she was taught in the kitchen. One other thing I want to show you, this is not a very spiritual part of the presentation, but this is what I refer to as the local mafia on Pine Street. This is me. We're all holding pistols. I'm sure they're toy pistols. This is Dick Bennett right here. And so when I was a high priest group leader in Minnesota, one of the wards, I had a member of my ward, my high priest group, who was a regional representative, and he had an assignment in Winnipeg. And he came back and he came up to me and he said, "Jim, greetings from Dickie Bennett," who was the state president. So I'll turn this now over to Dickie Bennett.
Thank you, Jim. So we'll just carry it on a little bit further. On February the 18th, 1951, in the Moose Hall, 165 Pine Street, Eddie Palmer was sustained as the presiding elder. The records don't say the branch was organized that particular day, like it says for other branches. But we're assuming that this is the day that the Sudbury Branch was created, because that's the day that President Palmer is made the first presiding elder in Sudbury. And that's Eddie Palmer. I just show you here. That's Eddie Palmer here. Eddie Palmer worked for Falconbridge.
He did.
He became a shift boss. But then Inco wanted him in management, and so he went over to Inco later on. But that's Eddie Palmer. I'll show his wife later on. This is George Morphy, who will later become branch president.
Yeah.
And this is my mother, who was the first Relief Society president of the Sudbury Branch for 10 years, and Lois Van Allen, who was her first counselor. But this is obviously taken a few years later, but I wanted to point out that Eddie Palmer was the first president.
Wow.
Did anyone know President Palmer?
Oh, yes.
That's a pretty good likeness of him, isn't it?
Well, we are not as president, but that's.
Now then, the Galovans
Bennett.
leave to go to Utah, and the branch is struggling because the Galovans were such powerhouses, a great, great, wonderful family. And now what's happening? My parents haven't joined the church. My mom is debating this whole thing. My dad's not quite convinced. They had started to investigate in 1948. They hadn't joined the church.
Oh, my.
And along comes this man here, LeGrand Christensen. And I believe that's his companion, Elder Raleigh, but this is LeGrand Christensen. Now, here's what's happening. During the Korean War, the conflict with Korea, again, the missionary force diminishes because the young men are being enlisted to serve in the military. So they start calling, the church begins to call older men 70s, more mature, married men, to come in the place of the young men. People who have great maturity and can speak the talk for some people that the younger missionaries couldn't always do. And this man sits down with my mom and dad, Elder Grant Christensen, whose son becomes the general authority, Elder Christensen, and challenges my mom and dad to quit smoking and pay tithing, which is not going to be easy. I can remember my dad saying, "We can't afford to pay tithing." And Elder Christensen said, "You can't afford not to pay tithing." You really can't. And my dad begins to think about this. And of course, they're looking at, what about our sons? And part of this whole equation is that we want for our sons what we see in these missionaries. And it's going to be Elder Christensen who's going to be the great missionary for my parents. That finally would join the church. And here we go. May 11th, 1952, with President Palmer conducting, my mom and dad and others, and my brother, Gary, are baptized in the church on May the 11th, 1952, in the waters of Mormon, at that old YMCA building that doesn't exist anymore. It did happen, didn't it? There's a record kept some other place too, you know. Okay, but there was, the branch always has its tensions.
Oh, my gosh.
I don't have time to go into all of them, but here we have it a fireside at the home of Harvey Jarrett.
Oh, my.
Someone was giving a long talk on early church history. We'd always go to Palmyra to see the pageant. A strong tension prevailed in the branch. When you get that feud, sometimes you get personality conflicts. And there are hard feelings, and we had to overcome that. First mention of a chapel was in 1952. And another building block. This was a really, I call it, all baptisms are equally important. But some of these early families that are joining the church, like Harvey and Jean Jarrett. Does anyone remember Harvey and Jean Jarrett?
Yeah.
Powerhouses.
Yeah.
The Dempsters joined the church, although they didn't remain too active for a long time. But this was a very important baptism. They had two boys, Alec and
Terry and Brian.
Brian,
Right.
both of whom are gone. They're all gone.
Yeah.
They're all gone. But look at this picture.
Oh,
This was a combined
Wow.
North Bay District mission
Wow.
baptism. This is just Sudbury, but it's all together. And here we go. Here's my father. This is Harvey Jarrett on his baptismal day, and there's Sister Petty again, Sister Lois Van Allen, Donnie Jackson, President Toon, who was then the mission president of the Canadian mission. He would always come up. Don Anderson. Well, there's so many here. This was a big day. And of course, this is me. This is the most important one in the whole thing. And my brother, Sister Weimer, Elder Christensen, Lois Van Allen, Sister Rogers, Betty Rogers. This is Peggy Palmer. Well, we can go on. There's Terry Jarrett. Sister
my.
Penny again.
Wow.
Wow.
The others are from Timmins, and I don't know all of them. That was a very great day.
No kidding.
But when Jim was talking, Gail says to my mother, he says she used to go, the Galovans used to go bowling every Saturday night and have their beer after they come back. And my mom and dad were right next door. And then after the Galovans become very serious, started to get very serious about it, Gail will say to my mother, Eb, they've got something. They really got something. And Gail, of course, was a good old French Canadian Catholic family who understands spiritual things. They really do. And that's how we came to join the church, through the instrumentality of many people. But anyway, Mom becomes the first Branch Relief Society president. But we're still having all kinds of problems in the branch. Notice this, more cooperation from the song leader in regards to having song selection and practice song picked out, so that the pianist, this is my dad, will have the songs and plenty of time to practice them. I gotta know what the song's gonna be. I can still hear my dad saying. Instead of everyone turning around at the last minute and causing confusion in our service. Anyway, there you go. Okay, here's another great picture.
Outside the Moose Hall.
This is in front of the Moose Hall
Oh my gosh.
on Pine Street. There is Jimmy over
You
here.
know, I want to explain the kids. Because this is me, and I look bored, don't I? And this is my sister Carol, and she looks confused. This is my brother Peter, who is distracted. And this is Gary, who's being very obedient. And this is Dick Bennett, who is goofing off.
Wow.
This is Sister Galovan.
Mhm.
Now, this is quite interesting. Eddie Palmer
Wow.
will serve as branch president from 1951 through to almost 1960.
Mm.
The very first branch president, magnificent man. He really taught me the gospel, Eddie Palmer. Harvey Jarrett, who was one of the chief engineers,
Oh, yeah.
first at Garson Mine, and then later at Fruit Stobie Mine. This man was from Saskatchewan and converted and became a lightning rod of faith in the Sudbury Branch. Harvey Jarrett. My father was first counselor to Eddie Palmer for several years, but my father was not an administrator. My dad was an entertainer.
Oh, yes.
And he will be the branch organist and pianist for the next 40 years.
Wow.
Even before the church's organist in Sudbury in 1948, he's playing the piano until he leaves to go to Winnipeg to join us in 1989.
Wow.
So I think it's one of the history-breaking records in the church, my father being the organist and the piano player. He would talk to anybody, anytime, everywhere. But this is a great picture
Nice.
of back in, and that's me again. About 1957. Now, I wanted to show you the next branch president of the church, George Morphy. You remember, some of the older folks remember George Morphy?
Yes.
George Morphy, what should I say about George Morphy? He was known as quite a character before he joined the church, working underground in Garson. How he ever joined the church is a miracle. And it's an even greater miracle that he becomes the branch president. But behind him, like a
Wow.
rock, is his wife,
Oh,
Dorothy.
Yeah.
Dorothy Morphy, who, of course, in their tragic, they go to the Cardston Temple to have their 4 or 5 adopted children sealed to them.
Mhm.
They go all the way to Cardston with their children in a station wagon. And on the way back, just after they had their children sealed to them, a day or two after, they had a terrible car accident. And Sister Morphy was lying in the back of the station wagon with her head up against the back of the seat, and suddenly, in 1 second, became a quadriplegic, severed her spine. Many people would have cursed God for that. Why? Why? We've been to the temple. We've done everything. We've done everything you've asked us to do. I've been baptized. I've been branch president. I'm going to the temple, and now this? Dear God, why? And many people in the branch, that was a blow. But they remained not just faithful, but lightning rods of faith and testimony. And George will take care of Dorothy and their children. They had 3 boys and 1 girl. I think she's still here in Sudbury. But what a record of faith. Some people curse God and die because of tribulation. Other people bless God and live. And she became one of the greatest examples of faith I've ever known in all of church history. Even in the early pioneer days. I never saw the kind of faith that these two had. And it's been a testimony. Sudbury is a microcosm of all of church history. It really is. Nothing in pioneer history is any better than what you see in the Sudbury Branch. Well, here's another picture. Let's just move on. I'm goofing off again. Okay, I'm just going to finish this up quickly. The last meeting in the Moose Hall was in January the 14th, 1962. This was the final meeting in the Moose Hall. I remember because I blessed the sacrament. And the old meeting house, and the very next Sunday I blessed the sacrament in the new chapel at Norfolk Crescent over in Sudbury, New Sudbury.
Wow.
And that's when we moved from one place to the other.
62.
Then we raised money every which way possible,
What was it?
especially hot cross buns. We sold hot cross buns by the millions. I don't know what it was about hot cross buns, but we targeted every street in Sudbury and sold hot cross buns and everything else. Bazaars and rummage sales by the hundreds. Because those days the church didn't just come in and build it. You had to raise 70% or 50%, whatever it was, and that was going to cost. There we are meeting in the new chapel.
Oh my gosh.
This is
my,
perhaps the
wow.
very first meeting in the new chapel. Connect
Yes.
Brother Rowley, Al Follette.
Oh my gosh.
That's President Morphy. There's President Palmer. That's me. President Louis Campanola, who was the first district president in the Sudbury district, and Bruce King. Bruce King was the foreman of the Garson Mine, an inactive Latter-day Saint. He was from Alberta, and he moved here, we don't know when, back in the early 40s. He didn't want to have anything to do with the church. He had left the church, and his wife Pauline and their son Richard, but he was a pioneer stock in churches, the King. But missionaries got to him, and he got to thinking. He said, "Now I was raised in this church, and I know this church is true, but it's getting in the way of my professional career," because he was climbing the ladder. But his wife Pauline said, "Bruce, it's time for us to change. like we heard in the sacrament today. It's time for us to make a change in our lives. No matter what the cost of my career, I'm coming back. Remember that. Bruce and Pauline King coming back to the church. We were flabbergasted that here comes the foreman of Garson Mine. And we're all just little peons, you know. We live in tiny little houses. Here comes the #1 guy for Inco almost. I'm coming back. And he became the district president. So never say never about, hey, I know.
Right?
It isn't just a story of being baptized, it's a story of coming back. That's what I mean Sudbury is a microcosm. So we had some bumps. People thought, well, maybe it's better in Toronto than here. Or maybe we should go to Alberta. And so we got a lot of move-outs. We were prone to the ups and downs of the nickel industry. The strike of 1958 and everything else. Everybody's on welfare.
Yes.
There were disagreements and arguments once in a while. And then, like I said, the lure of other places. And this one was very important. There's such a small membership pool and reduced opportunities for dating and temple marriages for our kids that the feeling that we better go where there's lots of people so that we can ensure our children being married in the temple someday. Well, that was a challenge. This has always been a challenge in what I call port of entry branches and stakes like this place. Where I live now in Utah, in Orem, they got problems of their own. They really do. But Sudbury had one of the great answers to our challenges was the Relief Society. The sisters. I know this because my mother was Relief Society president for 10 years. This is a report, it's right in the church archives, that my mom submitted to President Palmer. President Palmer submitted to the church. Here's my mom saying, well, the condition of the Relief Society is good. We had 2 rummage sales, which were quite successful. We served lunch at the special conference held here, made over $30. Another project, we made over so much money. As a result of the success of these endeavors, we were able to contribute quite generously to the building fund. We have no problems to speak of. Well, they had problems galore. Part-member families, husbands who are fighting their wives, beating them up. There were real problems in the Sudbury Branch, just like there were in every other branch. But here's what I remember. In our basement of my home, in our home on White Avenue, the sisters would have their monthly Relief Society testimony meeting. I was going to sleep in my bed in the next bedroom, but I can remember the sisters bearing their testimonies in the raw. It wasn't a public meeting like we have here in our chapel. The problems that they were having with their kids, the problems they were having with their husbands, or with their work, and through it all, I could hear them to this day. Nevertheless, no matter what, affirm their testimony of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that registered in my soul that you mean you're going through that hellish experience and you're still holding on to the rock. And I can remember Sister Murphy, so many other wonderful sisters bearing their testimony. Of course, both the men and the women built that church. Don't ever forget the power of the conversion of the sisters. Because I saw it firsthand. I saw it with my mother, and I saw it in Dale, and I saw it with so many others. Bishop Alver's mother. Bishop asked me, is there anything on my mother? So Bishop, I spent days, and I'll send you a bill later on. I found this record. I should have taken a picture of it, but as of the new members joining the church were Sister Jean McEwen, Sims, Abby Smith, Joan Alders. That's her name, right, Bishop?
Yeah, it was misspelled, but that's
How do you spell it? Okay, that's her. Is that her?
That's her.
ALB.
Oh, yes, I got Alders. It should be ALB. The last of whom attended Relief Society for the first time in October 1958. I got a picture of that for you. And so there you go. Sister Albers, the bishop's wife, joins the church. First time.
But she's not in Sudbury though.
So she's in
Yes,
Sudbury.
this is Sudbury.
Well, she joined in Sudbury. Oh, nice. Wow. That's a great place.
Okay. Now, I don't have time. We have to end this here. I'm just going to give a very, very brief overview now. Okay. President J. Earl Lewis from Provo, Utah, becomes president of the Canadian Mission after President Toombs. I remember him and his wife. They were older. Had retired. President Lewis was a saint. A man, the spirit glowed from that man. He was so patient. He was full of charity and kindness and love. We began to see administration in this church. You have to have the Spirit of the Lord, or you're just playing a tune. And he just embodied charity. And his wife, Sister Lewis, being older and more seasoned, knew all about Relief Society. And she taught my mother how to be a Relief Society president. And not just to hold meetings, but to change lives. And to show that the sisters have everything to contribute to this church. I'll never forget President Sister Lewis. And then, of course, President Monson comes on in 1959.
Wow.
And he, with his wife, and their many little children, are saddled, and I say saddled with all those little kids, to run the mission. Of course, President Monson is very instrumental in building chapels all over the place. But I got to tell you one short story. One night, President Monson was in the Sudbury Branch. I remember it vividly. He was in the chapel in New Sudbury of 1960. President Morphy's conducting. As I said to you, President Morphy is kind of not a seasoned pioneer kind of a missionary, member of the church. President Monson gives this talk, and it was a great talk. It must have been great, but I was bored. After it was over, President Morphy gets up and he says, and I mentioned this to President Monson. He says, brothers and sisters, tonight we have been blessed to hear the voice of a future prophet of God. And I can remember looking up at my mom and dad, and I'm saying to myself, you should never say something as stupid as that. I mean, that's just out of the ballpark. You don't say anything like that. President Monson, we've just heard the voice of a future prophet of God. Coming from President Morphy?
Wow.
When President Morphy died, I sent a letter to President Monson. Did you know that President Morphy had died? And do you remember the night? And President Monson called me out. I was stake president at the time. He says, I remember that night vividly in that little Sudbury chapel. This is the president of the church. He says, and the voice of God spoke that night. President Monson wasn't even a member of the Quorum of the 12. And here's George Morphy, who was the character of the mines, prophesying in the name of the Lord, and it came true.
Wow.
You don't think miracles have happened in this branch? Go right up to the very top of this church? All right, one last slide. So what's this all mean? It means the gospel of Jesus Christ unfolding little by little, here a little, there a little. One baptism at a time, one in this family, two in the city, or whatever it might be. And you never know the end of the good that can come from one conversation. And I saw that with my father, I saw that with my mother, I saw that with the Galovans. I see it in you. You're not here by coincidence. I would venture to say tonight, you're here because the Lord brought you here today to hear these wonderful talks, to hear these wonderful lessons, to understand that Sudbury is a powerful example of the gospel in its fullness. So we're going to end with this clip from Elder Thomas, Elder Monson, Richard Monson.
Richard Monson.
Yeah, about this point. Now, he's going to talk about the conversion of Brother and Sister Nielsen, who joined the church in Sudbury in 1957. Her husband was killed in a train accident here in Sudbury about a year and a half later. And here's again, you can say, gee, how come God let this happen? But notice what does happen. Let's see if I can get this to play.
You're playing and,
Yeah,
we would see you,
Yeah.
occasionally, yeah.
Yeah, let me just tell one faithful experience, because it follows up what you were saying, Jim, and also about timing. It happened in Sudbury after, Joe remembers it, there was a family that we met. We were teaching this one family. They were recruited by these recruiters for International Nickel. They lived in this little 5-room home with their 4 kids, and we were teaching them. One day we came to this little home. It wasn't any bigger than these 2 rooms. They had bedrooms, and here's another family. The man, head of the house, it was his sister and her husband, Mr. and Mr. Nielsen, and their 4 boys. They're all living in this little 5-room house. And we came in. We're going to give them a lesson. We're teaching. She put out her cigarette. She was listening. And later she told me, she said, when you guys came in, I looked and I said, they're going to teach us about the gospel. Are you kidding? But she said, you did something that I never forgot. And I don't remember it. She said, I was looking for a scripture. I couldn't find it. Finally, I found it. I wrote this and I said, well, just mouth, thank you. And she said, oh, they listened. They joined. We had a wonderful, almost raising from the sick bed affliction. It was a great experience. We were baptized, but we left. I was released, came home, and Brother Anderson, Brother Carl Anderson, called me and said, Brother Nielsen's been killed in an auto accident up in Sudbury. Just wiped out. He sent me I still have my newspaper article. But here's what happened. Here she is, this mother with 4 kids. They were recruited from up in Nova Scotia where they had a little grocery store. And when we told them about tithing, Brother goes, we can't, we're still paying on doctor bills for our son, youngest son. Sister says, we'll do it. Don't worry, we'll do it. And it was a great act of faith. Anyway, she tried to open a little store outside of Sudbury and it didn't work. And so she packed her 4 kids. She knew somebody out in Edmonton. She packed her kids, those kids, and they went out to Edmonton. And I lost track of them. One day I was sitting in my office at Iceberg's. He said, I got this call. Is this over? I said, yeah. This is Sister Nielsen from Sudbury. Good heavens, I hadn't heard from her for 30 years. She remarried. She and her husband had gone on a mission, came back. She went on another mission, came back. Her 4 boys, one was an airline pilot, he retired, he's gone on 2 missions. The other boy, he retired, he's gone on a mission with his wife. The 3rd boy had some problems, and he died, of course. The 4th boy lives here in Farmington. And so, and I could not see before, but I got a letter from her the other day. She's 93 years old. And her son lives up in Farmington, went and visited me. And I thought, as I talked to him, the same thing that you said. That first contact, and it's gone like this. Kids, now grandkids, now great-grandkids, all, and you never know. It's 60 years since I was up there. 58. Since I was up
Now you're telling your age.
Well, I'm not afraid. I'm 78. So, anyway.
How young can you get?
Yeah. Isn't that a beautiful thing, the gospel? What a beautiful thing it is. Just one person, by going like this, very innocently, changed and
affected their lives for generations. It's just it's a marvelous experience.
So, are there any questions? We could maybe take just 4 or 5 minutes. Any wanted to add?
Brother Bennett, are you willing to share that for our board history?
For a price, I think it's $500. We've already given Bishop Owens a copy of this whole presentation.
Thank you.
I remember your dad.
Oh, yeah.
I do too.
And he had stories.
You look at him
Oh,
and
my God.
Yeah. Johnny used to come over to our place. And he had these stupid stories. I don't think came from.
One night in the Moose Hall, my dad had Alec Palmer on his knee.
Oh, my gosh.
And I remember this, and somebody was long-winded. And, you know, they were quoting from every 1st and 2nd and 5th Corinthians. And it finally ended, and my dad's leg had fallen asleep. When he gets up to play the piano, he crashes. I'll never forget that with Alec on his hand, and survived. But we had some of those speakers in the Sudbury Branch. Another quick one, and then I'll end with this. Will we end? You know, will we ever end? My brother was a character, and he was heading in the wrong direction. Burning down sheds. My mom and dad he was going to go to penitentiary. He was heading that way. I was the model child. Because I would watch and see what my brother was getting under all kinds of trouble, and I didn't want to do that. But my brother was going in the wrong way. And he was about 13. 12 or 13. We were sitting in the Sudbury Moose Hall. One night, sacrament service was at 7 o'clock.
Oh.
And I remember vividly, we were in this front row. And my brother began to shake. And I got thinking, is he sick? Is he playing another goofy game that he's always playing? This is before cell phones. And speaker, I don't even know what the speaker was talking about. The Spirit of the Lord was there. Have you ever been in a place when the Spirit of the Lord is poured out? Really? Poured out in that little beer hall? And my brother suddenly got up and ran out. Right in the middle of the service. Going downstairs with the bathroom. And my mom says to me, hey, you gotta get this, go down and see what's wrong with Gary. He's gonna die. So I go running down, and here's my brother, tears in his eyes. Just, I'd never seen that. I said, Gary, what's wrong? And he turns to me and he says, I know it's true. And his life was changed in a second. Wow. Truly converted in a second. And if the Lord wants to do that to you, beware, because it can happen in a second. I've seen it. Other people for me, it's taken years. It's been a long process, full of questions and everything else. But my brother, it went from night to day in a minute in that little Moose Hall, and it stuck with him to the day he died. He died 4 years ago. Became an institute teacher, and the institute directors of the church said this was a man of God. He wasn't when he was a little kid. I'll tell you that. He was something else. But he became a man of God in a moment and lived that way the rest of his life. And that's the kind of miracles that can happen. And I testify to you with all my soul. This, for us, Jim and me and Ted, to some extent too, right? Ted, you could add to this. Sudbury is the waters of Mormon. How beautiful they are. Because miracles continue to happen. This isn't just history, this is the future. This is what's going on right now. The Lord bless you. In the name of Jesus.